Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down the biggest questions ahead of what should be an ever-eventful Week 5 in the football world. So joining me, as always, on this edition of the Fantasy Life Show, Dwain McFarland, Chris Allen. The boys are back. Dwain, happy Wednesday.
Bro, that was a weak intro. No Rock, no Cincy Storm Chaser, no Dwayne Allen. What happened? Wow. Did you just forget what you were doing?
I was ready to pat myself on the back. Didn't stutter, didn't mess up any words. I'll watch the film and get better, though. Chris, that's Cincy Storm Chaser, Allen.
Yeah, we're used to getting built up by you, man. Come on.
I know now I have less hype. I have less confidence going into this. There's no screw ups. I'm not none of that, man. I was hoping you would be able to kind of lead us in and you were the hype man for the show. So I don't know, man. This might be a lackluster podcast without any of that in the intro. But other than that, I'm doing all right, man.
All right, well, I'm going to take off. You guys just go ahead, do your thing the rest of the show, and we'll get that going. But in all seriousness, guys, fantastic show on the docket. Again, biggest questions ahead of Week 5. So Davante Adams trade murmurs going about. A lot to talk about. But first, I want to give you guys a quick word on Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus, our premium product over here at Fantasy Life, just trying to help you guys, give you guys that extra 10% of goodness that maybe is the difference between getting that fantasy championship. So don't get it twisted. You listen to us now. All of our articles always free. Newsletter, fantasylife.com, plenty of goodness there. But if you want our full consensus rankings, Dwayne's full utilization tool suite, and also some start-sit tools, waiver wire help, things of that nature, Fantasy Life Plus, it's there for you. So Tier 1 package, under $40 per year. Tier 2, still under $10 per month. Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. Fellas, major news item from, a pretty eventful Tuesday in the NFL world is that Davante Adams has informed the Raiders that he would prefer to be traded. So nothing is evidently done just yet, but Ian Rapoport has said that the Raiders are indeed sending out some feelers to teams. So Dwayne, overall thoughts on this going down? Sure seems like Adams has played his last snap in black and silver.
Yeah, it does seem like it's going to go down. I haven't had a chance to study all the teams that have the cap room and what does that even mean? Teams will go move things around, and I'm sure any moves that we hear today, right, around any sort of things that could have cap implications, it'll be they're getting ready to get Davante Adams. But look, let's face it, there are a lot of passing attacks that could use Davante Adams. He's not quite what he once was. He's still a really good target earner. He's not as big of a playmaker as he was a few years ago. But I still believe, Ian, if you get him with a quarterback that has accuracy, someone that really knows him, say an Aaron Rodgers, or just a good quarterback in general, like the Chiefs, he could obviously play really well and he could fill a major role for them. If he landed with a premier passing attack that didn't already have an alpha on it, I think he would be in the wide receiver 1 conversation. If he lands on a good passing attack that has a good quarterback but already maybe has a really good wide receiver, we're probably looking at him more as, a wide receiver 2. We just really want him to avoid landing in another situation like what we have with the Raiders, where we have to worry about the quarterback. They added weapons in the offseason, all those sort of things. So I actually understand, Adams, wanting to get out of there. You did get paid. So, let's be honest, you're getting a lot of money, so you're doing your thing. But I know the career's almost over, and he knows it. He wants to go try to win a championship, so you can't really blame him for that. So I think right now, if you wanted to trade for him, Ian, that's the big question I was thinking about. I would probably, if I could get him at a wide receiver 2 price tag, I would do it. That way, there's some downside. You could still have you could still have a guy that gets downside in the trade. But overall, I think a lot of the places he would land, we might think of him more as a wide receiver 1, which means that you then, actually gain something by trading for Davante Adams.
Chiefs certainly the pipe dream and the scariest for the rest of the NFL, albeit pretty unlikely considering the, probable non-chances of the Raiders trading him to a division rival. Chris, we did get a report from Bleacher Report's Jordan Schultz saying that the Jets are indeed one of the teams that Adams will be open to being traded to. So thoughts on the Jets or maybe any other teams out there that you would especially like to see Davante Adams traded to?
Well, a quick thought on Davante Adams. Is he the next version of Michael Scott, where he's just I prefer to be traded, and he just expects to be traded? That's not really how that works. It's not the whole bankruptcy thing. From the office is what immediately thought of. It's you have to. There's other steps that are involved before you get off the team. But if he winds up with the Jets, I think my biggest concern will be for Garrett Wilson and his fantasy production. Right now, the opportunity has been there for Wilson, and we'll talk about him later on in the show. But if you add in another like target hog like Davante Adams to this roster, like on a team where they are playing a little bit slow. We have seen their offense come up in terms of plays per game, but I mean, Allen Lazard has been the one already falling into the end zone. We have concerns about Breece Hall. Like, if Adams comes in, then yes, I'm with both you guys that we should probably consider him back in like the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 type conversation. But for Garrett Wilson or even for Breece Hall, I mean, guys that we invested like early round draft picks into at the beginning of this season, if a guy like Davante Adams comes in, it kind of throws that whole mix or like our optimism for either of those guys like returning fantasy value like into some sort of, I think I would have some issues with them from a fantasy production standpoint. But for right now, let's see if Adams gets back with his QB1 and maybe the Jets offense will start to move better, at least from an efficiency standpoint.
Going to be talking about Garrett Wilson a bit more here in just a few minutes. But guys, I did take the time to go through some just potential landing spots here. So mentioned, but the most scary for the NFL, got to be the Chiefs. Second most scary, Bills. Fun, I would say the Cowboys. Funny, the Dolphins. That would make no sense at all. Realistic, maybe the Steelers. Nostalgic, the Jets. Fire, Commanders. Really fire, the Lions. Even more fire, the Chargers. It'd also be really cool to see the Ravens, just so we got the Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Davante Adams picture. That would go really hard. I would hate to see them go to the Patriots or the Browns, though. So, Dwain, Girl Scout saunters to your door. Where do you think Davante Adams ends up?
I mean, I'm going to cop out and take the easy answer. It's the Jets. Because, like, we know that Aaron Rodgers is probably, really standing for him, in New York and trying to get him there. I am with Chris. Like, it would worry me a little bit for Garrett Wilson, but I do wonder if just having both those wide receivers is enough to make the offense good enough that we just like them both. I don't really care for any of the other wide receivers or tight ends on the team. Like, they're all fine, just because they're on the field, they could score a few fantasy points. But if you have those two guys together, I think you could have kind of a Puka Nacua / Cooper Kupp situation where just everything funnels to those two guys. And it might not be a terrible thing for Garrett Wilson, because the biggest thing I think we've seen so far, Ian, for Garrett Wilson, and again, I know we'll talk about him more later, has been some of the coverage that he's getting rolled to him. Teams wouldn't be able to completely lock that down. I am interested in y'all's thoughts as well, though, Ian. Like, the rest of the Raiders, what happens to them, if we have Davante Adams leave? We still have some weapons here, I think, that we kind of like.
Certainly helps. No, not the highest scoring offense, I think, to be a part of. But hey, Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker in these last 2 weeks have been putting out some good numbers. I would like to think Brock Bowers could maybe get more than 3 touches per game here in the future. Hasn't been the case over the past 2 weeks. Either way, plenty going down in Las Vegas, a story that I'm sure we will not be done talking about there. So, guys, again, that was the major news item from Tuesday, but there was a handful of other notes that I do want to quickly run through. So, starting off with the Pittsburgh Steelers, by the way, they are preparing for Justin Fields to start this week, despite Russell Wilson set to end this week with a full participation in practice while dealing with that calf injury. As expected, Justin Fields playing some very good football. We'll be talking about him more in just a little bit. Also, Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers did say on the Pat McAfee show his knee is a little banged up and swollen, so keep an eye on that. Also, Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel did announce that Tyler Snoop Huntley will start once again on Sunday when the Dolphins play the Patriots. Lordy, that is a horrible football game, but even bad football games still pretty good in the grand scheme of things. At running back, we did see the Colts sign Trent Penix to their practice squad. Just one of those low-key signings where, no, we don't care about him, but decent indication that Jonathan Taylor will not be ready this Sunday as he continues to recover from that ankle injury. At wide receiver, we did get word that Christian Watson dealing with, again, guys, another mild high ankle sprain. I love how we're getting this clarifier these days. Unlikely to land on IR per Jordan Schultz. And in other news, we did have Bills edge Von Miller suspended for 4 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy, and the Cowboys will be without DeMarcus Lawrence for at least the next 4 games. He landed on IR with that foot issue. So edge Micah Parsons also looking unlikely for that Sunday night game against the Steelers. Already a struggling Cowboys defense, and now they could be without their 2 single best players for at least the next week or 2. So that was the news, guys, and now we're getting to our biggest fantasy questions of the week right after this quick word to our friends at Experian. Experian is to your finances what FantasyLife is to your fantasy league. It is a tool and resource designed to make your life easier, and accordingly, the Experian app is free to download and serves as a one-stop shop for managing your financial health. With so many spending and subscription details to track, let Experian handle it for you. They'll help you find and cancel your unwanted or forgotten subscriptions, helping you save money and focus on what really matters, winning your fantasy league. Download the Experian app today. Just note results will vary. Not all subs are eligible. Savings not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account is required, and you can see Experian.com for details. It's Fantasy Questions Wednesday, fellas. Accordingly, we have 6 big ones that we're going to be attempting to get through over the course of the next 30 to 40 minutes. And let's start off with a look at some of these backfields, because as we know in fantasy football land, nothing is better, I would say, than finding that RB2 on the waiver wire who quickly works his way up into the RB1 ranks, whether it's because of performance, injury, or whatever that is. So, guys, in my weekly manifesto, I went through a handful of backup running backs who are just vastly outperforming the starters in terms of yards per carry, added some context with the rushing yards over expected, and also what percentage of their carries are coming against 8 defenders in the box. So I will say, man, quite a few here. We have Tank Bigsby really crushing Travis Etienne, Chase Brown over Zach Moss, someone we talked about a lot yesterday, Tyler Algier over Bijan Robinson, Bucky Irving over Rashad White, my guy Cordero Patterson over Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson over Ramondre Stevenson, Alexander Madison over Zamir White, and finally Braylon Allen over Breece Hall. So I get it. Defenses see the backup come in. It's not exactly a situation where it's a 1-for-1 just because a guy has more yards per carry. Doesn't necessarily mean is a better running back. All that to say, though, these guys are playing some good football and accordingly maybe should be potential bench stashes for us. So, Dwain, let's look at the ones who are not rostered in over 50% of Yahoo leagues. Kicking things off with Tank Bigsby, available in 88% of Yahoo leagues as of yesterday, and someone, Dwain, who you called your favorite RB waiver wire target of the week.
Yeah, if you're thinking rest of the season, right, and the opportunity to have a player that could change your destiny of your fantasy team, I do think it's a guy like Tank Bigsby. You just need a player this week. I get it. You may want to go get Trey Sermon with Jonathan Taylor, out with a high ankle sprain. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. But if I'm looking for a player that I can get onto my team that might be able to give me flex value in a bye week, I have an injury, I'm not going to be looking for 20 fantasy points from putting him into my lineup. But I know I might get 7 to 8, Ian, and I have that contingency upside that if something were to happen to Travis Etienne, that would be really big for Tank Bigsby. The other thing is he's outplaying Etienne, like you just mentioned. So there's also this opportunity to increase his playing time, and it wouldn't be completely out of the question for him to take over the backfield. Yes, Travis Etienne is a former first-round pick, but we're many, many years removed from that now. This Jaguars coaching staff is on the hot seat as well, so I think there's opportunity. What if a coaching change happens? They may be even less dedicated to Travis Etienne, so I think there's just a lot of potential outs here for Bigsby. And, man, the thing that caught me the most, Ian, with Bigsby was just when I turned on the player to watch it. When I watched Tank Bigsby and I watched some of the runs that he had, it looks like a very different player than what we saw last year. Looks much more like what we saw in college. He felt very tentative, almost more worried about ball security, rightfully so. Had some major hiccups last year that ended up getting him into the doghouse. So he looks like he's playing much more free. Everybody saw the handoff up the middle that was really like, okay, the C's parted, it's a draw play. You expect the running back to get 30, 40 yards on a play like that. But it was the play later in the game, Ian, where he starts off inside, bounces it to the outside, and he could have either ran over the defender, faked inside, or he could have gone outside. He fakes the defender inside, gets him off balance, and then turns on the gas to get around the corner. So I thought that was great. That's definitely something we weren't seeing from Tank Bigsby. Yes, did you see the head motions? I was trying to help you guys visualize what was happening. So that was the biggest thing. When I turned it on, I was like, who is this? Is this Tank Bigsby? Like, this is the same Tank Bigsby from last year. So looks really electric. So I think he's here to stay in a role. We've seen him in 2 games where he wasn't on the injury report, essentially. Last week he started off on it, but was off of it by the end of the week. And Ian, he's had 30% of the rushing attempts in those games. Now, that's not a ton, but again, that's a lot more than what we would have thought. We thought that really Travis Etienne was going to dominate this backfield. So I do think Bigsby is my favorite waiver wire ad, for, again, talking about guys that aren't owned in at least 50% of leagues.
Averaging 8.2 yards per carry. Etienne's not terrible, 4.6, but yeah, certainly a bit better for Bigsby. PFF's #1 running back right now, an elusive rating. And yeah, he's got some juice, guys, per next-gen stats. Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Walker, Tony Pollard, and Tank Bigsby, only running backs with multiple runs reaching at least 20 miles per hour this season. So if you do have the room on your bench, not a bad guy to be picking up. I think a similar sentiment, Chris, is true. Speaking of backup running backs playing well in terrible situations, Antonio Gibson for the Patriots. So, Chris, if anyone's been listening to me over the years, they kind of understand that I have been burnt on Gibson a few times, but the man's playing some good football, 4th in the NFL in rushing yards over expected. And don't look now, Ramondre Stevenson leads all running backs with 4 fumbles. So do you think that maybe in a just trash situation, Chris, could Antonio Gibson be a bit of a diamond in the rough?
Absolutely. Like right now, over the past like couple of weeks, like around like 30% of the teams carry. So like at least getting that contingent volume that you would want to see out of an RB2 with potential flex value on a week to week basis. But of course, he's also getting some of the targets, which like Gibson being that hybrid type of back, like even when he was on like his previous team, like we knew that he could be at least useful as a receiver, like out of the backfield. My only concern, though, is like, is this offense going to shift? And I'm not saying that they need to switch from Jacoby Brissett to Drake May, because I don't want to see like May behind that offensive line that could wind up forcing him into bad habits, potentially have him like at least learn in an environment that's really just not conducive to a rookie quarterback. I mean, we had the concerns about what Bryce Young's situation was going to look like, even though that's probably going to be different than where like May is going to be at, because May at least is a bit more taller, stronger, and actually can throw the ball downfield without having to jump in order to complete a pass. But I mean, we've seen Brissett take a number of hits like over the past couple of weeks. Just last week, 9 sacks on third down, 13 quarterback hits. I mean, this is going to be a situation where if Drake May isn't able to actually perform well, I mean, it's probably better for him to actually try and figure out and maybe work with either Jared Mayo or Jacoby Brissett to see like how best to maneuver out of those types of situations before actually throwing them to the Wolves. But right now, like the Patriots, they're sitting at they've been like negative in pass rate over expectation all 4 weeks. So maybe it would lend itself to maybe them trying to switch things up and pass a bit more. Jalen Polk getting a bit more involved. So maybe it's like overall this team environment starts to change, and then overall like Gibson can actually start to be more useful as a pass catcher. But either way, RB2 like flex type of territory for Antonio Gibson, absolutely.
I know what you're saying, Chris, and there's a lot of smart people that are with you on the Drake May thing. We've seen CJ Stroud. We've seen Jayden Daniels. It's not like those were good situations. They became good situations in hindsight when the electric top 3 quarterback came in and elevated the performance of everyone around him. Like, what is so different from Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels getting a chance to lead their team right now? I know the Patriots O-line isn't good, but my God, it's not like Drake May is the only quarterback in the NFL who has taken a risk of, getting hit once or twice. I mean, Dwain, can we please find out what this kid is made of?
Look, man, I want to see him as much as you do. Obviously, the coaches are watching him every day in practice. So I don't know. He must be absolutely terrible. Like he must not really know which way the field even, goes. Like Sam Monson had the great tweet the other day in the pregame warmups. It says, look, because he's throwing the ball the width of the field warming up. He's like, this guy doesn't even know what direction to play football. So I don't know what's happening in practice, but it must be pretty bad. We also are talking about a pretty conservative organization. And also, guys, you have these defensive-minded coaches. A lot of times they are conservative. They just want to make sure, let's not turn the ball over, Ian. They don't want to put their defense in bad situations. I got to tell you, Mayo, it doesn't really matter what situation your defense is in. You don't have that many playmakers. You traded away Matthew Judon. If you're really serious about playing defensive football this year, I think you would have probably hung on to him. So I'm with you. I want to see him. I am going to give the coaches the benefit of the doubt, though, and say, look, I don't know what's happening in practice. I will say this. Nico Collins last year, we didn't know that he was going to be a wide receiver 1 superstar, but we all liked him. We at least knew he was a good player. I don't know that Drake May has a good receiver yet. We're hoping it's Jalen Polk, and Jalen Polk did move into more of a full-time role last week. So maybe there's a chance there, but I do think that the Texans in hindsight also, Tank Dell looked really good. I get it. He wasn't a high draft pick, but when I look at the guys on the Patriots, Ian, it's like, okay, who can I squint and see, okay, this guy could actually really end up being an explosive receiver? That's the big challenge. There's not any weapons.
Mm-hmm. I just feel like, getting starters reps in practice, getting to learn through the fire on the field. Again, you're right, Dwayne. Jared Mayo knows far more than I do. But yeah, either way, it's the Patriots. So now we can go back to, ignoring the single worst offense in the NFL. Fun times there. But also note, guys, Tyler Algier available in 77% of Yahoo leagues. Bijan Robinson currently limited in practice with that hamstring injury. Good reminder that Algier remains one of the better handcuffs out there. And keep an eye on Alexander Madison really doing some, good things in an otherwise sour situation in Vegas. Also available in 67% of leagues. And we did hear from Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce earlier this week, noting that he does deserve more reps and he will get them. So certainly seems like the Zamir White era, if you will, coming to a conclusion. Fellas, let's talk about, again, a rookie quarterback who is currently starting and playing real life football, and that is Jayden Daniels. And how many quarterbacks we would actually rather have than the number 2 overall pick the rest of the season. Chris, the floor is yours.
I would say 2, 3. Give me Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, maybe, and you can maybe make the case for Hurts, assuming he gets his wide receivers and offensive line back healthy. I think that's probably about it. Like you could probably put like Sam Darnold the way he's playing into the conversation, but outside of like the rushing quarterbacks, the guys we knew coming into the season were going to be able to create not just as a passer but as runners, and those guys have really hit in that perspective. I would say those guys are probably the only ones I would like seriously consider to be, but the rest of the guys like Kyler, Burrow, Love, I mean, all those would be like a tier below. I mean, but this is the same offense that for the first couple of weeks that we thought this was going to be like, we're back to the horizontal raid, like hat tip to Lord Reeves, where they were, I mean, almost dead last in terms of like the amount of air yards they were throwing, like short of the sticks on third down, lack of deep passing. He was down there with like Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, all the rest of the guys in terms of deep passing. And over the last 2 weeks, like he's not only like top of the league in terms of being able to hit the intermediate and deep parts of the field, but that rushing production is there. I mean, 11 and a half like points per game just as a runner. And for reference, I mean, this is like, we're like only 4 games into the season. I get it. But Josh Allen, like over the last like couple of years, like around like 8.5 like per game. Lamar Jackson, like around 8 or so. I mean, like he's like head and shoulders above where some of the guys have been. Like, again, this is over the entire season. I mean, but Jayden Daniels has been able to create not just as a passer, but really giving us the rushing production that we really expected. And with Cliff Kingsbury creating that offensive environment that we really hoped him to, like really hitting the 1s and 2s in terms of like RPO rate, play action, like giving the efficient layups, like for Jayden Daniels to hit Terry McLaurin, Luke McCaffrey, like insert any of the pass catchers here, like allow them to continue moving the chains. I mean, this is the offense that we really wanted to see, like to allow Daniels to access both his passing acumen, the aggressive tendencies downfield, but also allow him to really have that rushing floor that we wanted for him. So there are very few quarterbacks that I can say for certain that I would want over Jayden Daniels at this point.
God, love the chicken and the egg situation where it's like, oh, did the Washington Commanders stumble upon just one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and all of a sudden Cliff Kingsbury is an offensive genius, or is Cliff enabling him? Regardless, great things going on in Washington right now. 23.4 fantasy points per game, Dwain. I mean, rookie year Deshaun Watson right now, the only quarterback to best that. So are you with Chris in terms of Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and that's probably it?
I'm keeping Jalen Hurts over him just because Jalen's proven it, right? And we know we're still going to get the tush push. So I think Jalen, once you give him Devonta Smith and you give him A.J. Brown back, we've got too much of a resume there to just say we're out on, Jalen Hurts. I get it, Ian. He's not as fast as he used to be, but he's still scrambling. He's still getting the rushing attempts. And he gets those key carries once you get down inside the 1 to 2 yard line. I think he's still going to score plenty of touchdowns this season. Overall, still like the Eagles offense better than the Commanders. I know the Commanders are off to a hot start, but let's see how Cliff Kingsbury actually responds when he's forced to adapt his game plan and another defense starts to take away the things that he's the best at. We've seen Cliff get off the hot starts before in Arizona back in the day with Kyler Murray. I really like what the Commanders are doing. I have a tendency to believe that this is more Jayden Daniels catching a lot of people by surprise than Cliff suddenly becoming, this offensive genius. But we'll see. I could be wrong on that. I want to leave the door open for Cliff to surprise us. So I would say to Chris's point, like it's hard to find a lot of guys that you're going to want over him. I would definitely have Josh Allen over him. I would have Jalen Hurts over him. Going to take Lamar Jackson over him because Lamar, again's got the longer resume, doing a lot of the same things as Jayden. But once you get through those 3 guys, I think that's where it's like, okay, pretty much you would have to take Jayden Daniels.
Right now, only Lamar has more rushing yards than Jayden Daniels among quarterbacks, and somehow the rookie is number 1 in both EPA per dropback and completion percentage over expected. Absolutely crushing it so far. So tougher schedule coming up. They get the Browns, the Ravens, the Panthers, and the Bears over these next 4 weeks. So I think we'll find out a lot about just how real this early season boom has been. Guys, let's move on.
Only someone had told you to draft Jayden Daniels this year, Ian. Sorry, had to interrupt you. If only I think we got that one right. I think we did tell everyone to draft Jayden Daniels. So, guys, we know Rashee Rice got hurt, and we can't help it. But you have Jayden Daniels, hopefully, if you were watching us.
Yes.
Again, guys, remember those great calls we had, and please just forget about the bad ones. So let's move on to a guy who hasn't exactly been killing it to crush the season. That's right. It's alleged Jets wide receiver 1 for now, Garrett Wilson. Dwain, not 1, not 2, but 3 Raiders wide receivers are averaging more PPR points than Garrett Wilson right now. As much as I want to believe in the guy, man, at what point, if the guy's producing as a wide receiver 4 in fantasy, do we have to say, you know what? Maybe he's a wide receiver 4.
I think one of our main jobs as like doing the jobs we get to do. I don't even call ourselves analysts. Everybody, quote unquote analysts. Look, you guys are right. We're just having fun, and we enjoy what we're doing. Do we research or do we get nerdy into it? You can call us whatever we want. But I think one of our main jobs is to help people remain calm when really the underlying signals are super strong for a player. And I think you have to look at what Garrett Wilson is doing. And we know, based on our research, what's the number one indicator of if a wide receiver is good or not. It's, are they earning targets? Unlike running back, just being on the field does not guarantee that you're going to get opportunities. And there's still a lot of people that actually don't understand this. If you're a receiver, you have a defender lined up across from you trying to take you away immediately. If you're a running back, the quarterback turns around and hands you the ball, and you've got 10 other players, well, we'll say 9, the quarterback's usually running the other direction, right, trying to do their job to help you now go gain yards. If you're a receiver, you've got to be able to beat press coverage across from you. You've got to be able to understand the zone concept you're seeing. You have to be on the same page with your quarterback. You got to know when to settle down in the zone, when to keep running if it's man coverage. You've got option routes. There is so much stuff. So you've got to be able to get open. You got to have the mental capacity to understand all these things that are happening in real time and be in complete sync with your quarterback. Garrett Wilson, man, he's got a 26% target share despite getting the best corner every single week, despite getting coverage rolled his way every single week. So I think, yes, he's still a wide receiver 1. He's had a brutal start to the season, but it's been one of those, I don't know, it's like Lemony Snicket's, whatever that guy's name, and a series of unfortunate events. I don't really know what the name of that show is. My kids watched it when they were young. But that's what's happening with Garrett Wilson. It's just been a little bit of a struggle because of different things happening. Last week we had the, Champ Bailey. Wow, I'm going way back in my Denver Broncos hat here. Patrick Surtain. I could at least just went to Patrick Surtain's dad, but he was a Dolphin, so that's not the image that clicked into my brain here. But looking at, the matchup last week, and then you just had the nasty weather, to start the game. So I'm not trying to make excuses, but it would be another thing, Ian, if I was looking at Garrett Wilson, I was like, oh, man, like 20% target share. He can't get more targets than Allen Lazard and an injured Mike Williams. That's not happening. Target shares, 38%, 22%, 26%, 20% last week, despite getting all that coverage from Surtain. So it's coming, and it's coming this week. Okay, when we look at the Vikings, they have given up the 3rd most receiving yards over their opponent's average. So all we do is we go look at what have wide receivers averaged, okay, for their team, and then we put that against what they've done against the Vikings. It's plus 38 yards per game. That's the 3rd best matchup in the NFL. Jaguars and Lions are the only 2 matchups that are better than that. Yes, the Vikings have been a surprisingly good defense because of their style of play, right? Because they like to blitz. They play a lot of man coverage. They give you these unique concepts earlier in downs than what people are expecting. But as far as just having someone that can lock down Garrett Wilson, they don't have anyone. And I expect him to go absolutely nuclear this week. So you still want to go buy low on this man. I'm telling you guys. And you can really buy low because even someone like Ian that knows all these things I just said, like to hear him even wavering a little bit, that tells you people that know way less than Ian in your league, they're ready to completely give up on this guy.
Vikings are the interesting team because you're right, Dwayne. I mean, the fantasy points per game allowed, the wide receivers and quarterbacks, they are up there a lot, but they're still number 1 EPA per dropback. So I do wonder how much that game script is kind of playing in to some of those numbers. And after this week, they get the Bills, number 6 in the EPA per dropback. I've done a good job against the Jets in the past. The Steelers after that. So, Chris, it's one of these things where, again, the volume has been good, but matchups have been tough. They're not exactly getting easier. And I don't know, man. Garrett Wilson, you're supposed to be a top 10 wide receiver. Could you beat Patrick Surtain on 1 or 2 routes throughout the course of a 60-minute game? Where would you kind of rank loosely, Chris, Garrett Wilson the rest of the season?
I would still have him in the wide receiver 1, like high end, like wide receiver 2 conversation for the remainder of the season. And for all the points that Dwayne just laid out, I mean, I'm hard pressed to believe that a guy that's earning like that many targets at the rate that he is, like even from a targets per route run standpoint, like so on and so forth, that he shouldn't be considered lesser than like where he's at. It's just the production isn't there. And like my only concern is like for at least from the volume standpoint, it's just like it's the nuance. It's can Nathaniel Hackett really scheme up the types of targets that would lend itself to Wilson being able to create and actually but be that like yards after, not even just yards after the catch, but just like come down with him and turn some of those like prayer yards into actual receiving yards. His slot target rate has actually dropped down like from the previous season, like slot target rate, not just the amount of snaps he's playing in there, but how often he's seeing targets once he moves inside. Like that has dipped a little bit from seasons past. And I think that's where it's like, all right, like if we're not getting him the layup targets, he's really really being used like as the like on the outside like a bit more. And we do have guys like Alan Lazard to take away at least 1 to 2 of those targets per game. We do have Cardio Conklin out there like getting a couple of those like, you know, short to intermediate targets, like those types of things where it's like, you know, maybe those 3-4 targets those guys are getting aren't a lot in the aggregate, but like would be those easy targets that Wilson could come down with a catch for like 8, 9, 10 yards and maybe fall into the end zone like once more than he has like so far this season. It's the little things that we're just not seeing so far. But overall, if he's still earning those targets, if he's still being considered like the wide receiver 1 in his team, we should continue to do so. And I'm with Dwayne that with this matchup going up against like the Vikings secondary this week, like he should be able to, one, not just earn the targets, but be in the defensive matchup that will allow him to succeed. And he should be like back in the wide receiver 1 ranks like after week 5.
Hey, Ian, and just real quick, I've studied that thing you mentioned. You know, I've actually studied like defensive EPA per play allowed, defensive success rate. You know that none of them correlate as strongly as just what a team's given up in yardage wise. Not even close. Like the R-squared value on defensive EPA per play against a passing game is 0.04. It's nothing. I'm just like, that's why I don't ever talk about it.
Really good pass defense, though.
Yes,
I don't think they're a really good pass defense.
How'd they shut down CJ Stroud for 60 minutes then, Dwayne?
Well, they're front.
Yeah, I mean, they had with pressure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they had
a pass defense. That goes into your pass defense.
They shut down one team. They give up 44 yards over the average of what teams get against wide receivers.
Jordan
and you're telling me they're a good
defense. Yes.
So okay, I disagree. Garrett Wilson's will go off this week. I think the Vikings are a good aggressive defense. I don't think they have anyone that can cover Garrett Wilson.
Who have Brock Purdy's by far 2 worst games over the last 2 seasons come against?
Yeah, it came against the Vikings. I'm just telling you. I mean, for fantasy points is what I care about. People are going to score fantasy points against this defense. Is that defense a good real life defense? Do they force turnovers? They do things to help them get ahead? They also have an offense that's been playing without mistakes that helps keep that lead for them. Yeah, for sure. I like the Vikings as a defense. I like them as a fantasy defense, but I don't think they're a tough matchup for wide receivers.
Anyway, speaking of Garrett Wilson, he went on with a quote yesterday saying, I don't think we do a lot of different stuff, to be honest. I watch football on Sundays and I see a lot of teams mix it up and stuff like that. I don't think we do that. So not exactly a ringing endorsement for Mr. Nathaniel Hackett, but hopefully Garrett can get back on the right side of things. I know his fantasy managers would prefer that. So plenty of questions still coming up, everyone. But first, a quick word from our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. Again, that is $200 in bonus bets instantly, and you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, guys, 2 of the most impactful injuries of week 5 both reside in Indianapolis. Anthony Richardson dealing with an abdominal and hip issue. Also have Jonathan Taylor with an ankle injury. So the Richardson issue is looking far more like day-to-day. He does seem to have a realistic shot of suiting up this Sunday. But man, Dwayne, as much as we look at a team like the Dolphins where we go from Tua to Snoop Huntley and just craters the value of everyone involved in the passing game, you could argue the opposite is true in Indianapolis if we do see Richardson on the bench in favor of Joe Flacco. Could not ask for a better matchup against a truly, and I mean actually real life and fantasy bad pass defense and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Dwayne, talk about how the expectations for Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, hell, maybe even Alec Pierce change if Joe Flacco is under center.
We can't agree on that. The Jaguars are terrible. They give up 48.7 yards over what their opponents have averaged to the wide receivers, equally bad against quarterbacks. So they've not really been able to cover anyone. So that's a really good thing for the Colts. And it would actually be better, to your point, Ian, for both of these wide receivers if we have Joe Flacco under center, because that means less dropbacks turning into scrambles. That probably also means we're going to get more passing plays. Jonathan Taylor not likely to play in this game. If I'm a coaching staff, now look, it's always dangerous to assume rational coaching. But if I'm sitting down and I'm getting ready to play the Jaguars this weekend, and I'm going to have Joe Flacco under center, and I'm not going to have Jonathan Taylor, and I've got Michael Pittman, Josh Downs out there doing their thing, Alec Pierce has flashed this year, we've got Adonai Mitchell, rotating in a little bit, I'm going to try to attack this secondary, and that's what I want to do. And so whenever I look at the fantasy ranks for this week, I'm working obviously on my rankings upgrade and downgrade article today. These will be two names that we're talking about. But if Joe Flacco's under center, we're going to be talking about Michael Pittman upgrading to near wide receiver 1 territory against the Jaguars defense. And Josh Downs would move from a wide receiver 4 into the wide receiver 3 range. Now, Josh Downs, man, over the last 2 games since being back in, has a 32% target share. He has right now 22.2 fantasy points. Last weekend, the weekend before, he had 5.2. Now, they're not getting him downfield. A lot of this stuff's coming around the line of scrimmage. His average depth of target's only 5.1. But man, when you're getting that sort of target volume, and if it's coming from Joe Flacco and you're having less scrambles, suddenly, Ian, you could look up and that could be 9-10 targets. If Anthony Richardson's under center and you got a 32% target share, you have 5 targets. Joe Flacco's under center, and the way that game script could work out, you're going to have 10 targets. So yes, massive upgrades for both of those wide receivers. You're going to be wanting to start them. You're going to be wanting to start them in most formats if we have Flacco under center. If Richardson's back, then that means Pittman's back to wide receiver 2-3 status, even with a good matchup, and Josh Downs is really just a wide receiver 4.
Would be a real shame to see Richardson miss out on this matchup after having a pretty rough gauntlet during the first 4 weeks of the season. And guys, can we please remember, Richardson, before he got injured, was 5 yards away from completing his second drive of 70-plus yards for a touchdown against the freaking Pittsburgh Steelers in the first quarter before he got injured. So I know there's a lot of slander going around about Richardson. He's young, he has flashed, and we all hope he gets better soon. But yes, we would be liking the Colts wide receivers a bit more in fantasy if he does miss this one. Chris, the other big news item, as I'm sure everyone saw on their waiver wires, Trey Sermon potentially the next man up behind Jonathan Taylor. That said, could have some Tyler Goodson going on as well. So, Chris, when you look at some of these handcuffed running backs, we've had Jordan Mason really come in and get fed this workhorse role. We've also had guys like Cam Akers come in and be a bit more game script dependent than maybe we would have thought. Where do you think Trey Sermon kind of falls on that scale?
I would say more on the Jordan Mason side of things than anybody else, than the Cam Akers side. Because at least for Trey Sermon, there have been spurts of him being productive, spurts of him being effective as a rusher. So I can at least see him being out there as the team's primary ball carrier. But similar to Jordan Mason, are we actually going to see him used as a receiver, like a route runner, out of the backfield? And from his routes per dropback just this past weekend, I would indicate that that's where the Jordan Mason comps comes from. All the volume, less of a receiver. Because I mean, look at the Dwain had so many good points about the pass catchers for the Colts. He doesn't really need to be. So that's where I can almost see cue up the sheesh tweet from you, Ian, on Sunday, where AD or Alec Pierce catches the ball at the 1 or 2, and then it's just Trey Sermon plowing in for a short tutty. I honestly see something like that going down. But for Trey Sermon, I think we can at least lay our hats or put our hats on the projectable volume in that offense, especially considering 6 most fantasy points allowed for running backs going up against this Jaguars defense. So if there is any rushing lanes, which I would expect for Trey Sermon, the volume should be there, and his effectiveness so far as a rusher should be there, at least to put him in that RB3, RB2 type of territory, assuming JT is going to be out for week 5.
Dwain, I made my ranks last night under the assumption that Jonathan Taylor will be out, and I settled with Sermon as my RB21, just ahead of both Bengals running backs, ahead of guys like Rashad White, Jerome Ford, Rico Dowdle, amongst others. You think that's about right, or would you go even higher?
No, I'm not going higher. I think right around that range is about right. I mean, I think Chris is right. The path to success for him is to score multiple rushing touchdowns. So I'll have to look at it again today. Whenever I first did the projections yesterday, we didn't know for sure. We had the whole, it's a mild high ankle sprain. Dear God, I'm so sick of this term already. I don't know what it is. It's a high ankle sprain. It's not good, guys. So yeah, I'll have to look at it again today, but probably somewhere in that range. I think the highest that I would go is I'm just kind of glancing at it right now. It's probably a mid-range running back too, just because we don't know. You have to be careful in these situations. I've gotten myself into trouble in the past, assuming that we really know how the pecking order is going to work out based on some really small samples. There's not been much work left over behind Jonathan Taylor. So we have a very small sample of snaps to say, okay, here's how it's looked. Now, Sermon has clearly, if you want to say, quote unquote, dominated those versus what we've seen Tyler Goodson get. But we've also seen coaching staffs that once they have a full week to game plan, they will sometimes change things on us a little bit. And there's a chance that it's closer to like 55% Sermon and then the rest going to Goodson. So that would be the thing keeping me from getting like too far ahead of myself. But I would say mid-range running back 2 would probably be the highest I would go.
Fellas, let's talk about an underperforming wide receiver. He probably had to use a 3rd-round pick on a few short weeks ago, and all you've gotten is a handful of wide receiver 4 or worse finishes. That's right, Brandon Aiyuk. Dwain, it's all of a sudden looking, though, like a prime bounce-back candidate this week against the Cardinals. So is Meow the time to go out there, find your trade partner, and buy low on Brandon Aiyuk?
Yeah, I mean, and I wrote this up in the utilization report. Like, look, he's just too good to be this bad. Like that's all you need to know. Like we're talking about a wide receiver that's in his prime that the 49ers just paid because obviously they know he's good. And when we look at his underlying data points, Ian, they're really not any different. So what was his adjusted market share, getting rid of games that he missed over the last few years? And he's been pretty good. He doesn't miss games. Last year he missed 1. He had a 22% target share, 22% target share, 16% target share, 22% target share. Where is Brandon Aiyuk? Let me see. I'll go to the utilization report right now and let's look it up. His target share, it's sitting right at 21%. Like he's the same dude. He just hasn't scored his fantasy points. And Brock Purdy's playing great. We're not handing the ball off to CMC, right? Or getting CMC in the passing game. So that's one less mouth to feed. Jordan Mason's really just a runner. He's not getting work in the passing game. So that means there's really just Debo, George Kittle, Brandon Aiyuk. The dude he's due for a blow-up game. Now, does that mean he's going to be a wide receiver 1 the rest of the season? No. Brandon Aiyuk ran super hot on touchdowns last year. That's something that we did talk about. And we said, look, some people claiming Brandon Ayuk's a wide receiver 1 this year, it's still too crowded in San Francisco for that to happen. But I still think when all the dust settles, Ian, you still have a mid-range to low-end wide receiver 2. Worst case, you got a high-end wide receiver 3 that, the production can be up and down, but you're still getting a massive value. What is he right now? He's the wide receiver 55 in fantasy. Wide receiver 55. He's going to by far outperform that. Now, nobody's going to sell him to you as a wide receiver 55, but if I can buy Brandon Aiyuk as like a mid-range to low-end wide receiver 3 price tag, you're profiting. I would be willing to pay anything. Anybody that thinks he's a wide receiver 3, I'd be willing to buy on it.
FantasyCalc.com gives you guys examples of trades that have been completed for any given fantasy player, and some of them are a little bit wonky. I think I saw like Brandon Aiyuk for A.T. Perry straight up, so we can't exactly take every single one, at face value. But yeah, right. But I did see some words for Chase Brown, Christian Kirk, Najee Harris. Again, those are probably on the lighter side, but Dwayne, they're possible out there for sure.
Dude, there's a lot of them. And when you guys say not in my league, I know, Ian, you give the great example of A.T. Perry, and you will see a few. But for the most part, those are pretty rare. You don't see many dumb deals like that. You guys just got to go check it out. FantasyCalc.com, put in the name of the player. Not only that, like it gives you, really more of like an overview of the player. And it'll tell you who they're getting valued similarly to. So right now he's being valued similarly to Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, DJ Moore. So overall, I think the market is still in line. But then when you scroll down, Ian, that's where you start seeing these 1-for-1s. 1-for-1 for Xavier Worthy, 1-for-1. You mentioned the Najee Harris one. I'm looking at the same thing as you are. And you have a date for it, guys. So you can actually see, okay, and these are all 10-1 or 10-2. So these have happened in the last 2 days. There's one on there you mentioned, Ian, Kareem Hunt. Like, okay, like Chase Brown, J.K. Dobbins, T. Higgins, that's like more of a coin flip, right? I hate those kind of trades because I'm just worried I'm going to trade the guy that's going to end up, being healthy and the other guy gets hurt. So I don't do like coin flip trades. It's got to be something I think really helps my team. But yeah, Brandon Aiyuk, I would definitely kick the tires.
Fantasy Points has a really cool average separation score, and they still have Aiyuk as a top 5 wide receiver this season. So maybe it makes sense that the guy who practiced, 3 or 4 times the entire month of August, bit of a slow start into the season. Chris, someone who is not having a slow start, though, Steelers, seemingly QB1 Justin Fields. Again, not quite confirmed, but everything we've heard from NFL Network's Ian Rapoport is indicating that Fields will be named the starter by the end of this week. So with Fields, Chris, I mean, don't look now, but he is the QB6, I believe, in Fantasyland after that huge blow up week 4 performance. So where should Justin Fields be ranked the rest of the season?
I would put him at least in the QB1-ish conversation, but more on the back end though. I mean, because there's at least until we hear Mike Tomlin definitively come out and say he's going to be our starter. Although I think he's built up enough of a runway, even just with the one loss this past week. The way that I'm kind of thinking about it, y'all tell me if you'd wholeheartedly disagree, but he stacked up 3 wins. I would at least assume that he would need to have at least 3 or more losses. I mean, it's probably too simplistic to think about it, but they just have to be that many losses in order for Mike Tomlin to really start to consider moving Russell Wilson back into the QB1 conversation for the Steelers. At least that's generally how I'm thinking about it. But it's just the way that Fields has played so far. And we talked about this I think it was last week, about how much of a passer he's developed into under Arthur Smith, and kind of giving Smith his flowers from a QB development standpoint. I mean, one of the more efficient passers over middle of the field, which was especially coming out of Ohio State, it was he can throw the ball down the field, pass, hit guys outside the numbers, but really getting into some of those more, I guess, complicated passing concepts, hitting some of those high lows to Pat Freiermuth, and allowing other players to access that part of the field that really wasn't in his game. And so since he has the floor of rushing, just over 8 fantasy points per game as a rusher, we saw him get into the box twice just this past weekend. If that's there, along with the passing, efficient passing, and not just explosive plays, I mean, he should at least be in the QB1 conversation, at least for right now, until we start to until the losses start to pile up. And then now it's more of a, is this the week that Russell Wilson is going to be back? That's my only concern for Fields at this point.
Really has been impressive seeing this early season. Small sample, admittedly, strides he has made as a passer. PFF 7th highest graded passer, 4th at completion percentage over expected. Even EPA per dropback, which is accounting for things like sacks and fumbles, 14th, which again, on top of what we know he brings to the table as a rusher, really nice bounce back campaign by the 25-year-old talent. So consensus top 8 quarterback in our FantasyLife consensus ranks. Great day to be a Justin Fields fantasy manager, at least for now. We'll see how things keep on going. Guys, those were the biggest fantasy questions ahead of week 5. And now let's get into the matchups of the week. Exciting times, Dwain, and we accordingly have the most exciting matchup, the highest game total. That's right, the smash matchup of the week. The Ravens at the Bengals, the only matchup in week 5 with a game total north of 50. So what's exciting you here, Dwain?
Yeah, this is a potential funnel situation for the Bengals, right? You're playing against a Ravens defense that's given up 57.8 rushing yards per game. That's the least in the NFL, but they give up 282 yards through the air per game. We've already seen Dak have the near comeback against them. So when we look at the Bengals, it's a situation where I love Jamar Chase. You're starting Jamar Chase anyway. So it's how am I really helping you here? That's not helping you, but it does mean an upgrade for T. Higgins. Whenever I hit him up in the ranks this weekend, Ian, I know you might have just been a genius last week. You might have been a week early on the smash play for T. Higgins, but I've got him right now ranked as my 43rd player overall consensus. When you look at the industry, he's down in the 50s. So I'm 10 to 15 spots ahead. And that's looking at flex ranks overall, guys, which puts running backs, wide receivers, tight ends all together. So he's a low end wide receiver 2 for me this week. But I think he has upside to give you a wide receiver 1 performance. Was definitely earning those targets last week, Ian. He had a couple of real close plays, acrobatic type things where if he gets his feet in, that sort of thing, he has a lot bigger week last week. So T. Higgins is a name that I really don't want on my bench, and that's my big takeaway for this matchup.
Chris, let's say one of us on this show happens to be deciding between T. Higgins and Dontavian Wicks and a pathetic 8-man fantasy league I've been in for over a decade. Who would you go with there?
I mean, I have to be the homer and take T, right? Like after the targets he was able to secure just this past week. And then also Cincinnati's offense as a whole, like second in EPA per drive. And that's that's after like adding like T back into the mix, first in pass rate over expectation. And this is going up against the Ravens defense, to Dwayne's point, that has been more susceptible to the pass like than the run. So between those two, I would definitely think that like T should grade out as the better option, even though I'm all about Wicks. And we'll probably talk about like that matchup between the Packers and the Rams here in just a second. But overall, I'm hopeful at the very least that my Bengals can put up at least a good fight, come away with the win. I mean, I'm crossing my fingers and knocking on wood that they can at least come out like with another win this weekend, but we'll see what happens.
Exciting times in the Allen household this weekend for sure. Good luck to you guys, my friend. Now, everyone, it's time for our Paramount Plus matchup of the week. It is the Packers at the Rams. Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Dwayne, a lot of offensive firepower here. Be a bit cooler. Both offenses were fully healthy, but talk about, let's face it, the main topic of the hour, this, kind of reshuffled Packers wide receiver room.
Yeah, well, one, we love Jordan Love in this matchup. Right now, the Rams are giving up 4.3 fantasy points over the average of the opponents that they face. That's the second most in the NFL. Seahawks, sorry, you guys are in last place now after Jared Goff just ripping you. Even though you looked like you were a really good defense against those bad quarterbacks for the first 3 games. That's the beauty of this DVP tool that gives you the fantasy boost over at FantasyLife.com. So people check that out. But yes, Ian, it's funny that you mentioned Dontavian Wicks versus T. Higgins. I have T. Higgins as my wide receiver 22. I have Dontavian Wicks as my wide receiver 23. So it literally does not get any closer than that. It is an absolute coin flip between those two players. I would slightly lean to Higgins, though, because, like, again, we know he's a good player. We've seen him for a longer period of time. You've got that really the matchup that's going to be conducive to driving yards through the air for the Bengals. But then whenever you look at the Green Bay Packers, if there's one downside potentially, to Wicks this weekend, which, guys, I think it's hard to find. I really love Dontavian Wicks this weekend. But it's the fact that whenever you look at the Rams, they've also given up 166 freaking yards per game on the ground. So we know that the Packers are willing to get after it in the run game. They've got Josh Jacobs. They like what Emmanuel Wilson's doing. So I think there's different ways the script could play out for the Packers. I really feel pretty confident with the Bengals that the way they win their game is through the air. So I would give a slight lean to T. Higgins, but I really do love this matchup between the Packers and Rams, and I am all in on Dontavian Wicks, guys. 20 fantasy points coming this weekend for Dontavian Wicks.
Let's go.
Just, maybe a few less Butterfingers before the game. Has had a problem with drops this year, just 4.7 yards per target. But as Dwayne has reminded us, most important indicator of talent is that ability to earn targets. And he has done that at a high level ever since entering the NFL. Last one, guys, it is our sneaky good, and I would argue just honestly really good matchup of the week. The Bills at the Texans. Chris, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, first time they've matched up. We got a Stephon Diggs revenge game. What else could a man want?
I mean, there's not really much else. I mean, well, maybe some more like passing yardage, just like the better pass game, like for the Bills receivers as a whole. And let's see, like, Keon Coleman had a couple of drops just this past week in a tough matchup against Baltimore. Like, I get it, but let's see like how that like wide receiver rotation winds up like working out like for the Bills. I mean, they went with this Packers-esque type of approach to we're just going to spread it out. We'll just have a bunch of playmakers involved. We'll get like, Mac Hollins, the guy that hates soup, and like, the rest of the guys involved from the passing game perspective. So overall, like, but still, Bills are second in EPA per play, like from an offensive standpoint. Josh Allen still creating as a rusher and can still pop off for big games, like when he can throw, like, just like flick the ball down the field as he's running towards the sidelines, as he did just this past week to Khalil Shakir. So like everything, all like taking everything into account, I do think this Texans defense isn't really one to, I guess, give me some concern about what Josh Allen is like as a fantasy asset. So overall, I'm looking for a back and forth like type of matchup between these two offenses.
Texas getting off easy. Really think the Colts in week 1, and then even last week, the Jaguars left some big time plays on the field. Wouldn't count on Josh Allen making the same sort of mistakes. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in as always. Check us out tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern. Myself, Dwayne McFarland, Matthew Friedman going through the biggest ranking adjustments of the week. Talk about a great day to be great. So for Chris, for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning to the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.